essentially, he was a middleman in a murder for hire. And it led to a convening, a meeting of 10 young Americans in the White House with President Obama. And I think it just reminds us why essential workers, frontline healthcare workers, community healthcare workers, maybe they're not in a big film, maybe they're not a big star in public, but all of a sudden you realize that they're the ones who are saving lives and changing lives. But I know we can do more. I know our generation can do more.
Hello audience, welcome to another episode of In Conversation With. Today we have with us Sam Vaghar. He is the Executive Director of MCN, which is the Millennium Campus Network, training our generation of social impact leaders on university campuses in 15 nations. He has represented the MCN on a global stage, from meeting with President Obama to speaking on the State Department speaking tours across 4 nations in North Africa and Eastern Europe. He is also an advisor to the Executive Director of UN Women. So let's dive into it. Hi Sam, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. So how's the lockdown going for you?
All things considered, doing okay. So family and friends are well.
Right. So any hobby that you've now adopted?
For me, to be honest, no. Life is really kind of continued. Obviously wearing masks everywhere, and
Right.
And actually just spending a lot more time in reflection has been kind of the biggest new aspect of my life. Just reflecting on who I am, how I'm going to show up in a virtual world, and a reminder of why we all do what we do.
Right. So I usually start the podcast with this question about asking the guest about their childhood ambition, because when I ask this, I get very interesting answers from all of them. So can you tell us your childhood ambition?
There were many. I wanted to be a professional soccer player, football player. I wanted to be a professional wrestler. I wanted to own or manage a hotel. So yeah, a lot of ambitions. I think the one common thread was, and I think this was instilled by my family, a strong sense of belief in the pursuit of dreams, and that really stemmed from my parents pushing me and telling me, Mashika, they said, essentially, you can do anything that you want, and that I really think set me up to do what I'm doing now.
So when was the point when you realized that social entrepreneurship is one for you and you want to help the world and hop onto this field?
Yeah, this is a great question. For me, it was, just a realization that the world, that there are fundamental flaws in the system that we have. I can share a story that I don't often share, but when I was 16 years old, we were in class in high school, and a professor asked us, it was a class centered on ethics, and they asked, do you believe in the death penalty or not? And most students just, wrote a position paper either supporting the death penalty or not. And instead I said something different, which was that, I didn't have the personal firsthand experience. I wasn't on death row. I didn't know anyone who was. So rather than make up an answer, I wanted to really dig deeper. I wrote to somebody who was on death row, and I'm 33 years old now. So that was 17 years ago, and we've kept in touch. We lost touch for a bit when I went to college, but we've been in touch for, over 15 years. And in this journey, I really learned about injustice, about how systems break down. This was an individual who, it's an incredible case in that essentially he was a middleman in a murder for hire. I know this sounds kind of hard to believe, but the wife wanted her husband killed, and so she went to a middleman, allegedly this man, and and asked him to find a hitman. He allegedly finds a hitman. Hitman kills the husband. Well, in the 3 separate trials, the hitman gets life in prison. The wife, who this whole story hinges on, is acquitted and found not guilty. And this middleman gets death row. And, I'm going to share this story more in full in the coming months. But what was powerful was he shared with me, look, he was foreign. He didn't have much funding, so he didn't really get the best legal representation that he could. And this case made it all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. And after 22 years on death row, he got off, and he's now back home. So for me, learning and following his story over 22 years, it just taught me how broken things can be, either by design, by default, or just through corruption, or through malice, that systems can break down, and that we need innovators, we need entrepreneurs, we need people to think creatively about systems, and really leverage that talent for good, desperately needed. So it was that experience. His story, Ahmadi says his name. We'll be sharing it further in the coming months, but that was really a moment when, as a teenager, I started to understand injustice, but that, change is possible. It takes a long time, but it is possible.
So actually, this also reminds me of an incident which happened in a country, which was really disturbing for the country. So we had this rape case, and the person who was guilty, he was from a very influential family. So he was heading the committee of his own case. So that was very disturbing for the country. So, we realized there are a lot of loopholes and a lot of loopholes in the system, which we probably will need a couple of years or more than 5 to 10 years to fill in those.
Yeah. No, it's, these systems should be about affirming and upholding justice. That's why we should have legal systems, and it shouldn't favor the rich or the powerful. So collectively, I know we have to do a lot better. And I think you see there's a social entrepreneur who's been really celebrated here in the U.S., Brian Stevenson, a new film last year called Just Mercy, and his organization Equal Justice Initiative. EJI would be one to take a look at as an example of the kind of entrepreneurship we need specifically around criminal justice.
So let's hop into the next question, which is about your program, the Millennium Fellowship. So can you tell us how was that born and what's your vision behind that?
So it was incredible. The genesis, the beginning of this journey, and where we are today. In terms of the beginning, it was really quite simple. I read 2 books that changed my life. One is Mountains Beyond Mountains, that I recommend to everyone. The second was The End of Poverty by the economist Jeffrey Sachs. Learned that over 700 million people live on less than $1.90 a day in extreme poverty, but that there are also things big and small we can do to respond to that crisis. And so when I was 19, put down those books, picked up the phone, cold called Jeffrey Sachs, went down to Columbia University 2 days later, met with his team. I said, look, I'm university sophomore, Brandeis University. I don't have many answers, but I know we can do more. I know our generation can do more to tackle extreme poverty, to advance at the United Nations, the Millennium Development Goals, now the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And I want to figure out what role we can play. And came back to campus, started small-scale public health fundraisers. Then in the fall of 2007, convened student leaders from across the city of Boston and shared, that we're all working to tackle injustice, but we're doing this work in silos. And there was a real kind of understanding that, really more in the form of a question, what would happen if we collaborated? And I just feel that point bears emphasis because so often in creating change, people want to be the CEO, the president, start something new rather than really seeing what's out there and, the decades or centuries of work that have come before us. And I've heard that point emphasized by so many people now that I feel it bears repeating. And 6 months later, we had our first summit at MIT with 1,000 student leaders from around the world, with Paul Farmer, Jeff Sachs, John Legend, the head of USAID, Paul, Jeff, and John joined our board of advisors. They said, Sam, we're in. Let's build this student network on poverty. I said, I'm 20 years old. I don't even know what this is yet, but okay, let's give it a shot. And 6 months later, really things kicked off. We launched Millennium Campus Network in our campus dorm rooms as a platform for undergraduates making a difference, providing training, connections, credentials, and have now been working 12 years on this work.
Okay, so how far would you say have you come? And what is your vision for the next 5 to 7 years?
So we've helped, at MCN, we've helped over 6,000 young people have deeper social impact in community. 75% of our alumni are now in social impact careers in the public and private sectors. And we've launched a program called the Millennium Fellowship. We've partnered with the United Nations Academic Impact to launch this program. It started with 11 fellows in the city of Boston, and we've slowly scaled it to a place where now last year we graduated in our class of 2019, 805 Millennium Fellows across 15 countries. This year we had just over 15,000 applicants for the Millennium Fellowship class of 2020. So, our vision really is to scale this to a place where we're ideally where we have 5,000 Millennium Fellows a year engaging worldwide in this program. So really on the scale of, for, a U.S. context, it's programs like the Peace Corps that are such household names. We really want to make the Millennium Fellowship a household name at the university level for undergraduates worldwide, so that employers, graduate schools, funders know where to turn for social impact talent at the undergraduate level, and that's something we're on the way to take a program to close to 1,000 fellows a year. We're on our way, and we want to keep pushing ourselves to reach that milestone.
Now that the world will step out, it will be a completely different world where remote working will be the future and many more things will be changed. So how do you think the upcoming world and the needs of the world will affect the program? And how do you plan to mold it accordingly?
Yeah, one of the things that we were fortunate in that we pivoted this program really in 2018 when we partnered with the United Nations Academic Impact. We made this a blended model. So the program is training, connections, credentials. The training is we train 2 student leaders in a train the trainer model virtually in our core curriculum as campus directors. directors, and they then curate the experience for typically a cohort of about 20 Millennium Fellows on their campus. That can still be done virtually. Our component, the feedback and support we provide to campus directors was already virtual, so there's nothing new there. And we've already kind of prepared now for an entirely virtual experience for fellows, because we couple that training with the webinar series where we invite leaders from the United Nations system, the Gates Foundation, many others to engage directly with Millennium Fellows and expose them to the myriad of pathways to a social impact career. None of that changes. So yeah, for us, we're already, we're pretty adaptive and prepared for the realities that we're living through. That said, it's always difficult. We wanted to make our programs accessible, and our network today, it's 39% first-generation university students. It's 56% female, 87% people of color. It's a global network. We have Millennium Fellows in India, in China, in the United States, in Mexico, and Pakistan, and Yemen, and all across the globe. And I think, one question that we're thinking about is, what do we do in places where access to, reliable internet might be difficult? And that's something that we're actually actively thinking through as a team. I think we'll have some creative, innovative answers, and where it's going to be harder to do it all live, we'll find ways to deliver this in kind of other medium, digitally where possible, or even maybe if we need to, via hard copy. And the bottom line is, when you're building a movement for the Sustainable Development Goals, when you're working to advance justice, you have to be representative in the movement and inclusive. And the moment you start leaving students out because you say, look, COVID-19 is a reality, what you're really doing is denying justice. And so that's something that we're committed to addressing head on.
So I saw your picture with Mr. Obama, and I was really excited to ask you about your experience with him. So can you tell us about that?
Sure. I could tell this story I could tell this story, like the full story, but that would probably take 8-10 minutes. So maybe if it's better, I'll share the abridged version, just to save everyone a little bit of time. But basically, in short, met somebody who really inspired me in DC, a homeless man who taught me never be afraid to talk to anyone. It led me to meeting an activist named Cal Penn, who had left Hollywood to work for President Obama on youth engagement. Kept in touch with him over 10 months, and really just worked to cultivate relationship, and then helped organize youth roundtables around the country, just to solicit and understand from young people what their priorities were. And then it led to a convening, a meeting of 10 young Americans in the White House with President Obama. It was a bit of a surprise for us. We knew we'd be in the White House, in the Roosevelt Room in the West Wing. We didn't know the president was going to be in the room. But about halfway through the meeting, Cal left, and then 5 minutes later, you can imagine just the wall that we thought was a wall opening up, and we all stood back, and we're just kind of in shock. And bounding in comes Bo Obama, the dog, and right behind Bo Obama in walks Barack Obama, and he said, "Hi, I'm Barack Obama," and we're like, "Yeah, we know who you are," and so we sat right across the table from each other. At the end of his remarks, I raised my hand, and so he called on me, and anyways, I shared with him an invitation for him and the First Lady to get involved in our work. A month later, the U.S. Department of State called and invited me to travel to Bosnia and Herzegovina to share our work with youth and educators, and then to Morocco, and then Bulgaria and North Macedonia. It's been an incredible journey. And what it taught me was, beyond just meeting the president, who is an incredible leader in his own right, genuinely just extraordinary. What that taught me was people are so much closer than you think they are. They really are accessible if you get creative and innovative, and also that moments can really become part of a broader movement. By raising your hand and calling for the opportunity to speak and making the most of every meeting, being intentional with your time. Meeting the president led to so much more, and really helped catalyze a further journey for us with MCN and with the Millennium Fellowship. So I would just share that the big outcome was, make the most of every meeting that you have, even listening and watching, this podcast. Think about, every time you're listening to something like Mitti Ke Rang, like when you're in conversation and just listening in, what are those concrete takeaways that you can actually apply in your life? And that's what I learned from meeting with President Obama.
Right. So there's opportunity in everyone you meet and everything you hear, and you can find opportunity in that. So Sam, since you hold the post of advisor to the executive board of UN Women, can you tell us about the organization and the vision it works with, and what are the things you've worked on till now?
Yeah, it's a huge honor to engage with UN Women. I advise the head of UN Women. I'm one of 12 leaders from civil society that does this. It's a 4-year term on this as part of this civil society advisory group for her. And, UN Women, one of the youngest UN agency within the system, really focused on gender equality worldwide, working in 90 plus countries around the world, and I think doing some of the most important work on the planet today. But obviously, it's no surprise, I think, to any of us, this is also sometimes some of the least funded and supported work, as important as it is. So I feel really honored to share time with this organization, with this institution. My focus is on youth engagement. So applying all I've learned from engaging our Millennium Fellows and others in the youth leadership development ecosystem for 12 years, directly with UN Women, especially their civil society team, just working to help shape programming and outreach, and even in the smallest ways contribute as I can. So right now at UN Women, there's a big global focus on generation equality forum. It'll probably take a different form now with COVID-19, but the premise was to have 2 global summits in Mexico City and Paris with thousands of civil society leaders, and a large percentage being young people at both convenings. So anyone who's interested can just Google Generation Equality Forum, obviously follow UN Women, and learn about that opportunity to meaningfully engage. Yeah, I've learned a lot in the process, just, identifying as male, understanding both biases and sexism and privilege I may carry, and reflecting on just how to show up as a better partner, as a better man, frankly, honestly, just as a male, and in my interactions professionally and personally. And there's a lot of work that we have to do. And we've been conditioned, I think, in many ways that are toxic and not healthy for relationships with women. So it's given me space to reflect personally, and to really take action professionally to help advance this work.
Okay, so like you spoke about gender inequality. So just to like we have a long way to go. I agree with that, but considering it, though it is very country and culture specific, but some of the struggles that women face every day are very common. So it is we don't even realize what we're going through because it's like embedded in the culture and we see it every day and it's so common for us. So what obstacles do we need to address to reach the SDG goal of gender equality for 2030?
I mean, to be honest, it might be a question you'd be better positioned to answer than me. I, all, in fact, I'm certain you would probably have more insight than I do. I can only offer this. I think, with respect to, there's some of the fundamentals around the pay gap and pay parity in the workplace. Obviously, we've seen a lot around with the Me Too movement around sexual assault, domestic violence. I don't know that there's any single issue. I think they're all interrelated. Um, yeah, I mean, if anything, and I know we can speak to it as well, and you alluded to this, sexism and discrimination based on, being identifying as female is, in so many ways, it's insidious, and it's similar to the racism that we're seeing and we all know exists, but but there's so many issues because you can just focus on a singular issue like gender-based violence. You could look at the economic impact. I think, unfortunately, it is pervasive and far-reaching, and I think we're going to need leaders focused on every aspect of this, from the physical conflict to verbal abuse, to our legal system, to our economic system. Just looking at how many women here in the U.S., the percentages of our Congress and our elected leaders who are women is embarrassingly low.
Right.
And so we really haven't done a good job of building a diverse and representative leadership in our politics that reflects the incredible diversity of our country. And that's the same for most countries on the planet today. So those are, we could look at almost every issue through a lens of gender, and we would find a gap in almost every issue. So I think, the advice that I share with many young people is start where you are, and wherever you can make an impact, even if it's maybe perhaps most importantly in our personal lives, how we show up for women in our life, just locally, our family, our friends, our loved ones, our partners. Are we really living our values? And that I think is where all of us can reflect and hopefully lead meaningfully.
Right. So my next question was actually centered around racism, which you addressed. So, Sam, it's 2020, and we still face very horrendous crimes centered around racism. And the 17 SDG goals, which we plan to achieve by 2030. Do you think this is in any way in alignment with the plans we aim to achieve?
Yeah, for me, it's a great question. And for me, my home city is Boston, Massachusetts, in the U.S. And our mayor just shared. He said that racism is a public health crisis.
Right.
And so I think in sharing that and recognizing the interconnection between race and even a crisis like COVID-19 and the disproportionate number of Black people in this country who have COVID-19, have passed away from COVID-19. Seeing in some communities where the percentage of the community that's Black is 13%, yet the percentage of people who have COVID-19 who got it was 30%. It's clear that this is where there's an economic impact, a socioeconomic impact, a health impact. Can you achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 without addressing, discrimination and bias based on race or gender? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, yeah, I think without question, it's important to listen to leaders who have spent decades working on race and racial justice and gender justice. One of our advisors at MCN that I'd encourage everyone to follow, her name is Dr. Helene Gayle. Helene Gayle has spent decades working on public health, but also writing more recently about really the interrelation between race and public health. I think these are things that implicitly we all knew was true, but now it's really in the mainstream. And I'm seeing a lot of friends here in the U.S. who never thought meaningfully about activism,
Right.
Who are now marching in the streets and are now thinking about what more can they do with their platform and voice to make a difference, which is really encouraging because, an agenda like the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs, it takes all of us. We're going to need everybody doing their part. And I think that includes an acknowledgement that the system needs massive reform, that we're not even close to being where we could and should be. And that's what it's going to take, not only to root out, racism or sexism, but also to achieve the goals.
Right. So how can we, the common man in everyday life, use our privilege to serve the society in a better way?
It's a great question. I think the best point that I can share is start from within. I think it's very easy to, and a lot of people will point to injustice out there, over there, external, and I see it in every part of the world. In every part of the world, I'll find a certain subset of people who will point fingers and say, oh, this corporation is doing wrong, or this elected official is doing wrong. They're the reason why the system is broken. They're the reason why there's injustice. And some of that might be true, but it's a lot harder to reflect within and say, how am I perpetuating inequality and injustice? Where am I falling short? Because none of us would pass a perfect purity test. Maybe you're a leader on racial justice or gender justice, or you're tackling income inequality, whatever the case might be, but then maybe you're not recycling and being sustainable in the ways you need to tackle and advance climate justice and environmental justice. So, I think none of us are going to be perfect. So hold that as a truth, that we can all improve in every facet of life. And I think where to start is really taking a scan of ourselves and reflecting on where the areas where we can better show up, and really work in this space with the keyword, and it's a core value of MCN, humility. How can we show up with humility in the world? And yes, work to improve across the board. Yes, when we're with family and loved ones and community members, be respectful. Try to call out injustice when you see it. Racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, you go down the list. When you see it, call it out. but also in those quieter moments, when you may see bias in your own being, or when you are doing things that actually aren't aligned with the goals and values you want to live by. Really trying to course correct and ask the hard questions of why. And then when you can, seeking out those opportunities to really shift the system. Because it's clear to me, and to I think most of us, that when hundreds of millions of people are living in extreme poverty, even as so many other people have opportunity and sometimes wealth and sometimes massive wealth, we can do a lot better. We can create systems that are much more equitable, that we're not asking for everybody to have a Ferrari or Lamborghini. We're asking for equity and opportunity for all. That is a foundational standard I think we can and should meet in this present reality. And we can all get there, but I think it starts with doing that harder work within. And that's really what I'd encourage everybody to do.
So just to summarize it up, the first step would be introspection, and we change and we adapt with the needs of the time.
Yeah, I think if we get that right, so many of these issues, you think about gender justice, gender-based violence, so much of this, whether it's sexual assault or domestic violence, it starts at home. It starts between two people. So imagine if we could do the work that would help address that and root that out. And you even see so many public figures who are high profile, who say all the right things in public and talk about justice, and then they go home and they're committing assault, or they're hurting their loved ones in some way. If we could just root that out, it would solve so many of the larger problems that ripple out from that. And so I would just say, start at home, start with family, start with the ones right around you, minimize harm, and maximize respect and an affirmation of dignity in the people right around us. Just love the people around you with respect, and start there. And that's easier said than done. And so many people fall short of actually doing that. So everyone wants some fancy answer about, what we can do in the world in a large systemic way. But I'd say start in the most simple ways with the people right around you, and even yourself, treating yourself with respect. I think when we start there, it becomes a lot easier to root out injustice on a global scale.
Okay, so be the change you want to see in the world. That is, yeah.
Yeah. It's a great quote for all the right reasons. Yeah.
Right. So this actually also answers my question of how can we collectively be shaped as better individuals. So Sam, I also had this question where I wanted to ask the importance of ethics and morals and gender sensitization in education. Like in our country, in India, we do not have it. We do not have anything related to morals or ethics in the education system. And also upbringing. How do you think education and upbringing frames our mindset or molds our mindset?
I think it's huge. Yeah, a lot of people have talked about one of the biggest difference makers in education is actually in early childhood development. Some of those first couple of years of life, the experiences that you have in those years really shape the rest of your life. And so many of the lessons that I learned, I think, were from kindergarten and from like my earliest days. And probably the biggest difference maker in my life is that I've been loved, is that I've had a family that has believed in me and affirmed me and told me that my dreams were valid and that, I could do anything that I wanted. My parents, my family is from England, is from Iran, and part of the culture has been, you have to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer. These are maybe older ways of thinking, but I think in a lot of communities in the world, family pressure says you have to do these things. And so instead of having a family that really loved me unconditionally and said, you can do and be anything you want, that's probably the only reason here I am today as a social entrepreneur. It's kind of an unconventional career path, but now I get to engage with leaders like you, Mishika, and leaders all over the world in really meaningful ways. So I would just encourage, I think our education system should be open to having uncomfortable conversations around race and gender and sexual orientation and religion and faith, all the things that matter so much to people in different ways, and rather than kind of labeling certain things as taboo and saying we can't even have a conversation. And I'm not trying to define. Every culture is different, so you can make your own determination of how you want to engage on topics. But I think what I'm getting at is we should be in a space where we can affirm dignity and where we can at least find commonplace and respect for people, whatever the differences might be, that we can respect each other as human beings. That is foundational. If we can't even get to a place of respect, then how can we talk about curing cancer or some of the big challenges of our time when we can't even get the most talented people around a table because they're different than we are, or they're from a different country? A big issue we're seeing here in the U.S. is around xenophobia now, increasingly. So I think for us, ethics should be in every classroom, especially at a young age. I mentioned at the outset learning about ethics from a very personal place of talking to someone on death row in high school. I think that, I was really fortunate and blessed to have a class on ethics in high school. And I would encourage educators and young people who want to go into education and work in the system to think about how to not just have people, as I had in many classes, just memorizing facts to memorizing facts, to just do that, but really find lessons.
Yeah.
Is it just Wi-Fi, or would it be
So,
helpful to just repeat that question?
yes.
Or
Yes, so
okay,
I'll just my next question. So it was
okay.
a lot of people have this misconception about social entrepreneurship. It doesn't pay you well and not very consistent and equivalent to all the corporate jobs we have around. So does a lot of young people go into marketing, sales, or business? What do you have to say upon that misconception?
That is wrong. That it's wrong. That I've seen plenty of young professionals um, go into social impact careers in the public and the private sectors, and frankly, you can actually make a lot of money in this space. There's a book that I'd recommend and a TED Talk that everyone can watch. Uncharitable by Dan Pallotta. He
Mhm.
speaks about this misconception that if you're doing charitable work, if you're making a difference, you shouldn't get paid very much. And in fact, he said, look, you're doing some of the most important work on the planet. You probably should get paid the most.
Right.
And if we can pay more and attract better and better talent and solve more of the problems that actually matter most in people's lives, that seems to track and make a lot more sense than we pay our entertainers so much, we pay so many other industries so much, which is also important. But you think about a crisis like COVID-19, and I think it just reminds us why essential workers, frontline healthcare workers, community healthcare workers, people working maybe in roles that are uh, maybe they're not in a big film, maybe they're not a big star in public, but all of a sudden you realize that they're the ones who are saving lives and changing lives. So there are so many pathways to a career that not only has impact but is sustainable. Obviously, within the private sector, through CSR initiatives, through nonprofits, really just building a solid strategic and business plan. Here in the U.S. context, there are funders like Echoing Green, Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation. There's a new one that I just helped spread the word about called the Elevate Prize that they're giving out $5 million. You can apply by June 29th this year, and then I think it'll be annual, but they're giving out $5 million to 10 leaders worldwide. You can be in India, you could be in the US, you could be anywhere. And it's $5 million that'll include a minimum of $300,000 US for each leader making a difference in community, plus mentorship, plus a network. So I just share that because opportunities like that exist that are open to leaders worldwide. We're in a global economy and community now. And so I would just encourage people to use tools like Google and use platforms to reach out and seek out. And if you don't know where to turn, or it doesn't seem like there's funds, do that work. You can always reach out to me on social media at Sam Vaghar. Reach out, ask questions, and if I can connect you to a funder, or if I can point you in the direction of a database of funding, go for it. Like, let's try every possible opportunity to get the resources needed to build the movements that are so vital in this time. And I've seen, honestly, in a U.S. context, leaders in spaces that you wouldn't normally think of, like philanthropy, where you can end up making six figures in philanthropy, 6 figures US, which is, really serious funding. And I don't think inherently that, making a living, I'll just say this, I don't think that should be in any way a problem. I think that, we need to create more pathways to opportunities for diverse representative leadership in philanthropy and nonprofits and CSR. And it starts in part with all of us recognizing that these pathways can be created and can exist. And so, a lot of it is going to require systems change, but I think in part, it also just it takes all of us recognizing all the pathways that already exist, and we don't do a good job of marketing those, and that's why sometimes they're really difficult for people to find. So would love to help. I'm actually writing a book in part that will touch on that theme. Would love to, reach out to me if I can help kind of illuminate some of those pathways for anyone listening or watching.
Definitely. Thank you so much. So there's plenty of opportunity. We just have to tap the right one and get going.
Definitely.
So I would like to ask you one of the best experience you had, like which made you really happy when you working with the fellowship program and working with leaders around the world.
There have been so many. I think in terms of best experience, the most meaningful ones are really seeing young people and it's why I do what I do, young people finding their voice and their power to make a difference. I just in recent months, I've connected different young leaders. One, Cami Krista. Cami is an undergraduate at Harvard who is focused on the climate crisis and a recognition that we need better decision-making tools for policymakers to help address the crisis. Sitting down with her, I feel like I'm sitting down with, a Fortune 100 CEO or a top entrepreneur in the world, and she just intuitively understands the magnitude of the crisis, but also ways we can respond. So putting her in touch and having her in conversation with a leader like Paul Pullman, who is a CEO of Unilever for the last decade, we facilitated that conversation. And just seeing Cami continue to elevate and being in these spaces alongside global leaders, and really be taken seriously. To me, to play a small role in moments like that is profoundly meaningful. And then knowing what our fellows go on to do, having Millennium Fellows now in the last two classes, 2 Truman Scholars, 2 are Rhodes Scholars, one executive produced an Oscar-winning documentary short, was on stage at the Oscars as a 20-year-old, and all of these leaders focused on really affirming justice and dignity in our world. So to know that that's the North Star for them, and to help them in even the smallest ways advance their work, and to do virtual engagements and to travel the world to help advance this movement, it's an incredible and humbling experience, and one I'm really blessed and fortunate and grateful to have.
So just like to end the podcast with a last question about your message to the young people out there longing to make a change.
Yeah, practically speaking, if you're an undergraduate anywhere in the world, I'll just share, go to millenniumfellows.org, 2 N's in Millennium, go to millenniumfellows.org, apply for the Millennium Fellowship. We also have the Millennium Oceans Prize at millenniumoceans.org. We want to create these very concrete platforms and pathways for young people making a difference, to really prepare for careers of impact. And then beyond that kind of practical advice and invitation, I will just share in closing the best advice I ever received in my life. And I alluded to it earlier, but when I was 18 years old, I was walking along the street in Washington, D.C. I came across a man who was homeless. Most people, including myself, you might see somebody homeless on the street, and you might just walk by and pretend they don't exist. And in this moment, I decided to do something different, and I sat down with this man, and we shared lunch for about 45 minutes in the bitter cold. About 20 minutes into the conversation, I asked him, I said, "How do you survive?" And he looked back at me, he looked at the passerby, and he said, "Never be afraid to talk to anyone. Never be afraid to look up at those above me. I've never been afraid to do that. Never be afraid to talk to anyone." And that advice stuck with me. It's the single best piece of advice I've received in my life. It didn't come from a world leader. It didn't come from a professor. It came from somebody who maybe society would write off and say is less than, is less important, is a drain on society. And in fact, just the opposite. He really helped me find my voice and my power to make a difference. So never be afraid to talk to anyone. Yes, things can be scary sometimes, but act with courage for justice, and really use your voice and your privilege and your platform and your talent to affirm justice. The world needs it. A world with COVID-19, especially now, I think it's even more evident. We need to build systems that are rooted in justice and dignity for every human being and everyone on this planet. And I'm just grateful to you, Mishika, to everyone, honestly, everyone who's going to listen not only to this podcast, but to everyone who's going to listen to Mitti Ke Rang, everyone who's going to do your part in listening. Now take that next step to reflect and then take action in your community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you for sharing these lovely messages and lovely experience.
It's my honor. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and really looking forward to continuing to collaborate.
So one last thing, how does someone reach out to you?
Sure. They can connect with me on almost any social media platform at Sam Vaghar. V as in Victor, Aghar is my last name. So at Sam Vaghar, I will make the time to connect with any listener. because you're following the right platform. And so I would love to connect, and however I can support, I will.
Thank you so much, Sam. That's really sweet of you.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you for the time, and really sorry for the early morning podcast.
No. It's my pleasure. It's yeah, I watched part of I was watching. I went to the YouTube link for the colleague from Gary V's platform. It was really powerful. I think like you're cultivating a great constellation of leaders, and so I'm really humbled to be a part of it. Thanks for thinking of me, and yeah, we'll definitely make sure to feature this in our platforms. So send me the links whenever it's ready, and then however I can, would love to be a resource and support however I can.